This is the A9 Mark III from Sony. We are in Portmeirion in North Wales and we're going to be shooting here, and we're also going to be capturing some action later on. So let's get into it. The A9 Mark III has a 24.6 megapixel sensor with a global shutter, and it can synchronize with flash at any shutter speed. It uses Sony's latest AI subject recognition for subject tracking. We're going to hand over to Terry in a moment so he can take you through all of these features. If you want more reviews like this, and if you want to keep up with the latest news from WEX, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll keep you up to date.
So we're here today at Portmeirion in North Wales, and I'm using the Sony A9 Mark III. One of the key benefits from this camera, we can shoot at 30 frames per second, as does the A1, but this particular camera, because it's using a global shutter, we can actually shoot at a burst of 120 frames per second. So give us an additional C5 button right here on the front of the camera, which is easy to access when we're shooting. So we could be on the top dial, we could have selected 5 frames per second, 10, 20, 30, and where we want to burst at 120 frames per second, we literally just engage the C5 button and that will fire the camera for us at 120 frames per second. Once we release the C5 button, it will revert back to the shooting speed we were using previously. One of the new features in the Sony A9 Mark III, which I absolutely love, is the PreCapture facility. And this is the first time we've seen this on any Sony Alpha cameras. And what that means in real terms, I can go into the menu system and I can select the time frame, anything from 1/5000th of a second right the way up to 1 second. Once I do that, the camera will start recording in a loop images for that specified time frame once I engage the autofocus system. So what that means is, if I'm perhaps waiting for a piece of action to start, maybe wildlife or sport, once the autofocus is engaged, the camera is recording the images of the loop. So if I slightly miss the peak action or the part of the action I'm really interested in, perhaps if I the shutter release just a little bit too slow, too late, the images are already stored inside the camera, so I can go back in there and retrieve them to make sure I get that perfect shot every single time. And the big bonus is that that PreCapture facility is available at 120 frames per second also. Some of the new features in the Sony A9 Mark III firmware updates are really useful. One in particular is the FTP improvements. And in a particular instance, the camera will automatically FTP an image once you lock it on the back of the camera, and this cuts multiple steps out to make it a one-stop solution. Now this is useful for sports photographers, documentary photographers, news shooters, anybody who needs to get their images straight out of the camera to the news desk instantly. Another useful feature is the file management. Now when we scroll through the images on the back of the camera, once we come to the end of the images on one of the cards, it will automatically start showing us the images on the second card. And again, that's a massive improvement. And this camera is all about speed, and Sony are making great steps to make it as quick as it can possibly be. So we're just here at Carnarvon Airport and we're having a little bit of fun using the Sony A9 III just to photograph some aircraft. They were demonstrating really with a fast shutter speed how when we lock the rotors and the propellers in flight, that there's no distortion at all. Traditionally I would go for a slower shutter speed to show movement in the rotors or the propellers, but just for the sake of the exercise, as the aircraft lifts, we're just freezing the propellers or the rotors, and we're just showing that they're perfectly represented with no distortion whatsoever. And the reason that we can freeze the propellers without any distortion is because of the global shutter and the way it reads the information from the chip. It reads all the information at a single point in time, as opposed to a traditional sensor that reads and scans top, right, and makes its way down line by line. This sensor inside the Sony A9 Mark III it reads all the information from the sensor in a single moment. And this time again we're shooting at 1/80,000th of a second with the Sony A9 Mark III, utilising that power of the global shutter. We've got our pilot, he's sitting just inside the cockpit, his head is in the shade, so we're using the power of the flash just to bring the detail out, and it's just so refreshing to be able to shoot at these shutter speeds. So it's really bright at the moment, so we're managing to contain the ambient exposure value and then add flash to lift the exposure value on the pilot, Daniel. So just again for me please, Daniel, this way. So we've just finished our helicopter flight at Carnarvon Airport and it was fantastic. The camera, the A9 Mark III, behaved wonderful. But one of the things I just want to speak about is that when we were on the apron waiting to board the aircraft, we were taking some pictures of aeroplanes and helicopters as they were landing and taxiing to leave. And the AI subject recognition in the A9 Mark III we had set to aircraft. And it recognised every single one of the aircraft, be it a helicopter, aeroplane, and it put a focus box around the subject, around the aircraft, and then it would track it. And it's a fantastic system, and it's a huge part of the autofocus system and the power of it in the A9 Mark III, that it can recognise so many different subject types. Another big improvement on this camera is that we now have 759 autofocus points, and that covers over 96% of the imaging sensor.
So there's no question that the A9 III is primarily a stills camera, but there's still actually some really good video performance in the body if you need to use it. Most notably, it shoots in 4K and it shoots up to 120 frames a second, so there's plenty of options when it comes to high resolution slow motion video. All of that video can be recorded in either H.264 or H.265, so it depends on the kind of compression you're after, and it can all be recorded in 10-bit 422 for that color flexibility. You'll see the familiar color profiles from Sony that you know and love, such as S-Log and S-Cinetone, so again, you can get a nice look straight out the bag, or you can do color grading to refine your image. But one of the biggest things is that global shutter, because it's not just useful for photography, it's actually got a huge amount of video use. And that's primarily because it has no rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is a video phenomenon that's been in a lot of mirrorless cameras, which means that actually when you're doing fast pans, objects that should appear vertical in the frame appear slightly wonky. This, because it reads the entire sensor at once, does not have that issue, which means that if you're somebody that wants to shoot really fast moving things, this is a common theme amongst the A9 III, you'll probably have noticed by now, this camera is going to perform brilliantly. But all of that stuff was available upon release of the A9 III, so what's new when it comes to this additional firmware they've added? Well, firstly, you've got focus breathing compensation, which means that if you're seeing any focus breathing in your image and when you're doing focus pulls, the field of view is changed, well, it won't do, because it actually does include a slight crop on the image, but it means that it utilizes that crop to cancel out the focus breathing and keep the field of view exactly the same. You also can use the monitor and control app to remote view your camera. So if you're rigging it up in strange places, or if you just want to hand it to a client so that they can review your video, you don't need all of these Teradeks and really fancy bits of equipment. You can do it just simply using your phone and the app, which is wonderful. And finally, it has an auto framing feature. This means that if you have, like, let's say quite a wide lens, but you don't exactly want to frame it yourself, so for somebody that might be filming themselves and there's multiple things happening in the frame, or you're moving around the frame, but you want that frame to have a bit more energy to it than just your standard static, then it has an auto framing feature, so it will detect what it thinks you will want in frame and move it around for you. It's worth noting that this can be done in post yourself, but if you're somebody that wants a quick turnaround, this can save you a lot of time.
But that's it from me on the first ever full frame global shutter camera when it comes to video, so let's get straight back to the stills.
So during the flight, I was shooting at different shutter speeds, fast and also slow. I was shooting as slow as 1/100th of a second at times, and the IBIS built into the Sony Alpha camera body, which gives up to 8 stops of image stabilization, was doing a fantastic job. As it is quite windy outside and the aircraft was buffeting about a bit, and they did have a fair bit of vibration, but we were still getting really clean shots. At the other end of the scale, I was shooting at 2,500th of a second, and I was actually freezing the rotors, which we could see when we looked through the window. And as those rotors were frozen, we could see they were represented perfectly without any signs of distortion whatsoever. And that's exactly what you'd expect from shooting with the global imaging sensor on this camera.
Right, that brings us to the close of our review of the A9 Mark III, and we just have a few more features that we've been exploring that we wanted to share with you. One of which that we've been testing out is the different focus areas. Obviously you showed off, Terry, before the focus tracking and the kind of AI subject detection, but you said that there were some features that came in with the A9 Mark III that you were quite looking forward to in terms of the focus zones.
Yeah, I mean the focus areas, I've been asking for an improvement in them, so we've got more options, and Sony have delivered on this camera, they really have. We now have several additional focus areas. So as the focus areas reduce in size, we now have a number of focus areas which sit between some of the existing ones, so we've got more of a gradual decrease in size. But the big news is we now have 3 customizable focus areas which we can totally customize ourselves and save as a preset. So if we want to have a panoramic vertical focus area really small, we now have that. We can also have a panoramic focus area, and we can just customize it and make the shape and the position of it just to suit our own needs. Ideal really for remote camera work more than anything.
You were saying that some of your pictures of squirrels would have really benefited from that, or did benefit from it.
Yeah.
So,
well,
how did that play out?
Yeah, so definitely. So if I set up a reflection pool and I want an animal to come, if it's a red squirrel perhaps, I'm only really interested on the area where the animal is going to walk. So at that point, I don't want any trees catching the autofocus or any reflections in the pool. And this is ideal for this because I can make the focus area just fit that particular situation. And once the squirrel comes in there, the focus is going to snap straight away. And the thing to remember with wildlife, you know, things happen very quickly. They appear, they take the content, you know, they're coming for a hazelnut or whatever. It happens in a fleeting moment. So having that, it really is useful. Another great feature on this latest firmware update for the A9 Mark III, Johnny, is that we now can change, we can fit a speed light to the camera, and we can have one set of settings for the speed light. And then once we switch the speed light off, the camera will revert back to the settings before it identified that there was a speed light on the hot tube.
Right, so it recognises whether the flash is on or off.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it can switch your settings accordingly.
Between two settings.
That's brilliant.
So yeah. Perhaps if I'm shooting in a really fast environment, documentary style photography, it could be wedding photography, if we're moving in difficult lighting situations where perhaps we might be outdoors now, and we're going to set the camera for the ambient, but we might go into a shaded area where we want flash, but we wouldn't necessarily want the same camera settings for the flash. So now we've got 2 sets of settings that the camera will recognise and revert back to between the 2. So
fantastic. So if you're hopping in and out of a wedding venue or reception or something like that, and you've got that outside light, and you also need to pop.
And again, it's all about speed with this camera. So Sony are really pushing the envelope, really, just to make sure that everything is as quick as it can be from a usability point of view, as well as the hardware in the camera.
The price of the camera at the moment is $6,099, and that is currently available with 0% finance and a 5-year manufacturer's warranty from Sony. So if you need a camera that can capture that action, then I think the A9 is absolutely for you. Hope you've enjoyed this review of the A9. If you've got any questions or any comments about the camera, if you think this is the camera for you, let us know in the comments below. If not, we'll see you next time.